Hello class, welcome to Hebrew 501. Each week I will provide you with lectures over each of the chapters of the textbook. These lectures are meant to supplement the textbook, so please be going through the textbook as we're going through these lectures. And please try to take it just one idea, one concept, one step at a time. It can feel overwhelming if you look at Hebrew all at once, but if you try to break it down one concept or one idea at a time, it becomes much more manageable. And so what I want to do today is I want to talk about chapter 1 of the textbook. In particular, we're just focused on learning the basics of the Hebrew alphabet. So with the Hebrew alphabet is consonantal, meaning it's only consonants, and Hebrew is read from right to left. English is read from left to right. So you can see the arrows pointing there. This first letter over here, the Aleph, is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, all the way to the Tau, which is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So we will be going over these in more detail in the next slide, but you've got here the Hebrew alphabet. Remember, it's read right to left. That's one of the big things to get used to when reading the Hebrew alphabet. And there are 23 consonants in the Hebrew alphabet. We'll learn about vowels in the next chapter. So let's try to look at these one letter at a time and focus on each of the sounds that they make. By the end of the week, one of your goals should be this: to know every letter of the Hebrew alphabet and to be able to understand and recognize the sounds they make as you look at Hebrew words. You don't need to look at a Hebrew word and know what it means yet in English. That's not the goal of this week. The goal of this week is going to be learning the Hebrew alphabet and the Hebrew vowel system, and then to be able to read and pronounce words, and then to be able to look up words for their meaning, but not to know words as you see them. And as you're studying the Hebrew alphabet, the best thing that you can do for yourself is to just make it manageable. Break it down into bite-sized pieces. So instead of trying to remember all of the letters all at once, try to remember 3, 4, 5 letters a day. If you could remember maybe even up to 7 or 8 letters a day, that would be awesome. But don't try to remember everything in day one. So if you are watching this on Thursday, try to remember Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, and Wow maybe. And if you master those, then get 1 or 2 more on Thursday. And then Friday, reinforce that by going back over them again and then acquiring a few more of them. You can read through the whole alphabet, every day, but don't study it by reading through all of them at once, all the time. Instead, study it by just breaking it down into just a few letters. So let's go over the Hebrew alphabet now. So the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Aleph. Aleph is actually silent. It doesn't make a sound. It's actually a position in your throat. So go to say the word apple and stop before you pronounce the A in apple. You feel like your tongue compress up against the back of your throat just slightly. That's the position that your mouth is going to be in, that your throat is going to be in when you begin saying a word that begins with Aleph, or if there's an Aleph within a word. Aleph will always then end up sounding like the vowel that's around it. There will always be a vowel attached to the Aleph in some way. And so we'll see that as we get into vocabulary starting in chapter 2. So Aleph. So I'm going to say a word and then you practice pronouncing it back. So Aleph, and then you say Aleph. So look at that, break that out into flashcards, whatever you would need to. Bet is the next letter. This has the B sound for the most part. Sometimes it can sound like a V, sometimes it can sound like a B. We'll go over that in just a moment. Gimel. Dalet. Hay. Like a bale of hay is almost like what it sounds like. So the Bet sounds like a B, the Gimel sounds like a G, the Dalet sounds like a D, the Hay sounds like an H. Wow. So this is the W sound in Hebrew. If you're learning modern Hebrew, this has a V sound. It's called a Vav, and it has a V sound, but in classical Hebrew, it sounds like a W. So Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Wow. Each of those sounds like what the letter begins with, except for Aleph, which is silent. Zion, so Z sound. Zion. Chet. This is one of the more difficult ones. Chet. It's almost like you're scratching your throat. Bach. Bach, right? If you say, Johann Sebastian Bach is his name. It's kind of it's not CH so much as it is chet. It's like a raspy H. Tet. It's got a T sound. Yod. Yod. Y sound. One of the ways maybe you can remember the yod is it's very small, like Yoda. Yoda is very small. It's the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Any sort of memory device that you can use to remember things like that is super helpful. Cough. So it almost looks like an open mouth, like cough from the side. So that's got another K sound. So you've got this cough sound that's got, and then we're gonna have a kof, which sounds similar to it later. Lamed is the L sound. So I'm going to go over these again, and then this is just the first part of the alphabet, and then I want you to repeat them as I say them. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Wow, Zion, Chet. Really practice that. Chet. Tet, Yod, Kof, Lamed. So that's the first part of the alphabet. The next part of the alphabet is Mem, which is the M sound. Mem. Noon, the N sound. And so this third column that you see is really just trying to give you like an M or an N sound like it would appear in an English word. Samic, which is an S sound. There's another S sound later. Ayin, probably this and Chet are the two most difficult letters to pronounce. Ayin is more like a sound that your throat would make. Ayin, than it is anything else. It says that it's silent. It's called like a hard glottal stop. So da'at is a Hebrew word. That middle lack of sound there where I make a hard stop. Da'at, that's the word for knowledge. It is the ayin in the middle there with a vowels around it. Pei. So pei has a P sound. Tzadeh. This is a TS sound. This is not uncommon in languages. Other languages have like a TS sound as well. You've maybe even seen like the word tsar, Tsar. It's the same word as czar, Czar, in other languages. Tsar, Tsar, right? Tzadeh, TS. Kof. It's almost like a hard K sound. Kof. Resh. Resh is the R sound. Sin, not sin. Sin. It's an S sound, like the Samic. Very similar sound. Sheen. Notice the seen and the sheen, right? They look almost identical. The only difference is where that dot above them is. And so the seen has the dot on the left. The sheen has the dot on the right. So it's a sin, right, to put the dot on the left. Maybe you could remember something like that. So seen when you see it like that. And then tau is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And that's a hard T sound like tet, which we learned earlier. So I'm going to say these again, and I want you to repeat them. Mem, Noon, Samic, Ayin, Pei, Tzadeh, Kof, Resh, Sin, Sheen, Tau. By the end of this week, it would be really helpful if you could have the alphabet memorized and know the sound that each of these makes. So even if it's a little bit difficult for you, right? Like if you could say Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Wow, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kof, Lamed, Mem, Noon, Samic, Ain, Pei, Tzadeh, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tau. By the end of the week, maybe not necessarily with that rapidity or that fluency, but if you can say them like you can your ABCs and know the sound that each makes, you'll be cruising for the rest of the course. And as you're studying them, don't just remember them in your mind. Look at them while you're saying them, because you need to be able to read these. So we just went over the alphabet, and 5 letters in the alphabet, when they appear at the very end of a word. So if this letter appears at the end of a word, they look slightly different. So you can see there the Kaf, which has the K sound. When it appears at the end of a word, it's almost as if that last section of it that goes out to the side just drops down instead. So that word is derek, which means like a road or way. So the final form of each one of these is going to look slightly different. The meme isn't, it just gets a little bit boxier, doesn't it? So these are the exact same letters. They're pronounced the exact same way. They just look a little bit different at the end of a word. So think about if you've ever seen anybody like make an S at the end of a word, and then they've like curled the end of the S all the way around, like through or underneath the rest of the word. We still know that that's an S. We can still identify it. We still pronounce it as an S. It just looks a little different sometimes when people write it at the end of a word. Here, right, we're pronouncing these the same. They're the same letters. There's no difference in them. They just look slightly different. So the Kaf drops down there, and it goes a little bit further. We call that below the line. It drops below the line. The Mem gets a little bit boxier. The Nun does the same thing, where it just kind of lengthens out and drops below the line. The Pei does the same thing. So he's still got that same beginning to it. And then the Tzadeh does basically the same thing. It just kind of straightens out and drops below the line. So when you're memorizing the Hebrew alphabet, you want to memorize what these final forms of these words look like as well. So these aren't as important. You'll get used to them over time. Focus on the vocabulary, or sorry, focus on the alphabet at first. Memorize those, and then once you feel like you've mastered that, then come to these final forms and just remember them. This is where it gets a little bit confusing. A dot will appear sometimes in some of these letters. These are known as Begad Kafat letters, and the only reason why they're called Begad Kafat letters is because it's the Beit, the Gimel, the Dalet, the Kaf, the Pei, and the Tau. And if you just squash all those letters together, it sounds like Begad Kafat. So the Beit has the B sound, the Gimel has the G sound, the D. So Begad Kafat. These letters can take a dot. This dot is called the Dagash Lene. And this dot will slightly change the pronunciation of the letter. Really, this isn't something that you need to master this week, but it is something that would be good for you to know and keep in mind and practice for the next 8 weeks and maybe even beyond if you continue to learn Hebrew. So the bet, when it takes the dot, it has the B sound. When it's hollow, or when it doesn't have the dot in it, it actually has more of a V sound to it. So it's got that. Have you ever? So if you've ever been reading the Bible and you've seen that the word negeb, Negeb, is how it's probably spelled in your Bibles. It's actually got the bet without the Dagash Lene in it, so it's actually more pronounced Negev. Negev. It's a desert in the south part of the country. The Gimel has more of a GH sound to it when it doesn't have the dot. The Dalet has more of a DH. So the difference would be Adam and Adam. That would be the difference between those two. Like the word for ground is Adamah. You could say Adamah and it would be fine. It's not a big deal. The Kaf, not a huge difference, right? K and CH, but a hard CH. It's not like ch. It's still almost a K sound. The Pei is probably the Beit, the Pei, and the Tau are the most distinct. So really those are the only 3 that you need to focus on, I think, here with any level of detail. The Pei moves from a hard P to a PH sound, like in phone or alphabet. So if you don't see the dot in it. It's going to have a PH sound in it. And then the tau is when it's got the dagesh lene in it, the dot. It's going to have a hard T sound like tet, right? Tau, tet. But when it doesn't, it's going to have a TH sound in it, like thin. So each of these is slightly different, but really I would say only focus on the bait, the pay, and the tau. All right. Again, this is something that you want to work on after you feel like you feel comfortable with the alphabet. So if you can feel comfortable with the alphabet after about 2-3 days of study, then you'll work on recognizing those final forms and then go into the Begad Kifat letters. This is only by way of introduction. It's not important that you remember this right now, but I just want to introduce it here so that later on when it comes up, it'll be a little bit more familiar. There are 4 letters in Hebrew that are gutturals, and then there's a semi-guttural letter called resh. So the aleph, the hey, the chet, and the ayin, and then resh, they'll have certain rules associated with them. They'll prefer certain types of vowels and different things like that. This is just by way of introduction, so you'll have to know these later. But I just want to bring these up to you that these are important. This is an important grouping of the alphabet that you will want to know and be able to recognize. So if you feel like you've mastered the other things, think about that for a moment. If you don't feel like you've mastered those other things and you're struggling to keep up, just let this wash over you for now. We will come back to it. I'm just trying to introduce this idea to you now so that when it comes up a little bit later, it won't feel as strange to you. And then I just want to say that there are some letters that look alike, especially right now. The key to overcoming this is to start reading Hebrew words as soon as you possibly can. That just means pronouncing them. It doesn't mean knowing what they mean in English. It just means looking at a Hebrew word and pronouncing it, which we'll talk about in chapter 2 when we get into the vocabulary. But you see the bait and the cough. They have a similar look to them. They're different, but right now they probably look very similar to you. After you've been reading Hebrew for a little while, they won't look similar at all. You'll be able to recognize them from across the room if you have 20/20 vision. But right now, they'll look a little bit similar. Again, familiarity and regular looking at these letters is what's going to make it easier for you. And the way that you should study Hebrew is different than the way you've probably studied for any other class. The way that you should study Hebrew is you can't wait until Wednesday night at 10 o'clock to decide you're gonna look at the material for the week. You really have to study in short bursts. I would say try to study for 15 minutes a day, 5 times a day. So if you've got a break where you can you just look at the alphabet for 15 minutes, think about it, and then go away for a couple of hours and then come back to it again, that's the best way that you can learn this language. If you try to cram everything into a short period of time, most people, not everybody, but most people can't learn a language in that way. So these are letters that look similar. Practice pronouncing those letters. Look at them. Notice the differences between them. I'm not going to go over them all here. You don't have to reproduce this chart or anything like that. I just want you to know these are different letters, though they have somewhat of a similar look to them. And then there are some letters that we talked about even when we were looking at the alphabet that look somewhat alike. The tet and the tau, right, when it has the dagesh in it. The kof and the kaf, and then the samek and the sin. They have similar types of sounds. That shouldn't really throw you off. Just know that there are a repetition of sounds between letters. I hope that this was helpful. This is chapter 1 of the textbook. Whenever I finish a lecture, a short video, I will sign off kind of using the end of 2 Corinthians, where Paul is addressing the church. It's called the grace. It's been used by Christian meetings and assemblies since Paul wrote the book of 2 Corinthians. And he says, "Now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of his Holy Spirit be with you all. Go in his peace."